Assalamu alaikum, family. Welcome to the Sajdah channel. This morning is Coffee Talks, and we're going to continue our discussion on historic preservation. Yesterday, we talked about the spiritual aspects of just the concept of preservation. We talked about preserving our spirituality, preserving our body, preserving facilities. And so today we're going to dive a little bit deeper into the industry of historical preservation. So be a friend, tell a friend, and I'll be right back after a couple short commercials and a beautiful prayer. And we're going to dive into what this actually is, even as a profession, for those of you who are thinking about getting into it. All right, I'll be right back.
O Allah, guide me among those whom Thou hast guided aright, and preserve me among those whom Thou hast preserved, and befriend me among those whom Thou hast befriended. Bless me in whatsoever Thou dost grant me, and deliver me from the evil of what Thou hast judged. Surely Thou judgest, and none can judge against Thee, and he whom Thou befriendest is not disgraced. Blessed art Thou, O Lord, and exalted be Thee above what they set up besides Thee. I bear witness, nothing deserves to be served besides Thee, and I bear witness that Muhammad is Thy servant and apostle. Amen.
The Honorable Elijah Muhammad, who in my judgment is the master historian, taught us that of all our studies, history is the most attractive, and it is best qualified to reward the researcher. History is most attractive. Why should history be most attractive? Because history is the recorded time of the human family in its struggle to overcome obstacles. There is no life that is without struggle. The Holy Quran teaches us that man, meaning man and woman, is made to face difficulties. And after difficulty comes ease. But it is history that guides us through difficulty. For if you know how people who had difficulty yesterday got through, and if your difficulty is somewhat similar, then today we also can get through if we follow the guidance of history. This is why Carter G. Woodson and many of our black giants fought for black people to know our history. Because in not knowing our history, we don't have a guide. And without a guide, we are lost. No wonder the Bible...
Assalamu alaikum, family. Peace be unto you. Welcome to the Sajdah channel. This is our Saturday morning coffee talk, and we're going to continue in the pre-events. It's not the wake. The awake of winning the 2025 Preservation Excellence Award for the Elijah Muhammad House pre the ceremony or acceptance on Monday. I thought I'd get into preservation. And so yesterday we broke down what it meant to preserve. And we talked about some of the spiritual gifts around that whole preservation process. And today I wanted to dive a little bit deeper into historic preservation. So I'm drinking water today. Y'all know we had a dust storm yesterday in Chicago, where the pollen count was through the roof, like literally. Like they were telling people, get in the house. Now that it's going to rain a little bit, I think it's going to wash some of that away. But it was crazy. You talking about itchy eyes, itchy nose. So I'm just hydrating. I did that yesterday and today. I'm just hydrating today. And I'll be back with y'all with the coffee and chai, inshallah, tomorrow, Monday. We'll see. Anyway, so let me give you a little bit of background on me and my love for history. I heard the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan talking about how you have to study yourself. And when I combine that with something that happened to me when I was selling real estate one time, I remember I was showing a condo in Hyde Park, and it was in one of these old historic buildings. Now, y'all know how I am with history. Since as young as I can remember, I've always loved history. I loved world history. I was really big on reading biographies growing up. Big patron of the library, big patron of the bookmobile and all of that. My parents kept books in front of me. So going into this particular historic building in the early, probably 2000s here in Chicago, over in Hyde Park, I'm noticing, the historic architecture, and I'm taking note of it. And as I'm going into the door, there was a woman who was walking out of the door. And she was an older Black woman, and she blocked me from going inside. And I just looked at her I was like, excuse me. And she said something to me that I ask myself all the time. She said, what did you show up on the planet to do? And I was like, needless to say, once she went on, I went on in, went up, showed the condo. I can't remember if I sold them that condo or not, but that resonated in my head. What did you show up on the planet to do? And sometimes you get those little angel messages as you're navigating through the world. But I just found it so interesting. And so when the minister said to me that Allah had been preparing me for this since before I was born, I started to weave all that together, and I thought about my love of history and how this project allowed me to bring all of myself to it, all of my talents, all of my everything about me I was able to bring to this particular project. And so this historic preservation side of things is important, because I've met a lot of teens who say, well, you know what, I think I might want to major in history. And then I see the parents who aren't responding well to that, because they like, well, all you could be is a school teacher or a history teacher. Nothing wrong with being a historical teacher, but you can continue on. You could get your doctorate. You could work in archivist. You could work in historical preservation. And I'm going to break this field down a little bit. I'm someone who Allah has answered a prayer that I made somewhere around my junior year of college. And I asked Allah at that time, I'd heard my father use the word mogul. And I remember looking that up and saying, I want to be a mogul. I want to be knowledgeable about a number of different industries, so that this entire empire that I'm going to go out here and build, this is me at, 18, 19 years old saying this entire empire that I'm going to go out here and build, I want to have knowledge about it. And I said, I want a job after college that will allow me to see a number of different businesses, institutions, and industries. And being that I have studied so much over the years prior to college and in college, I want to be able to pull that together and let all of it be of use. And thus far, he has answered that prayer. Just sharing that, because sometimes you just never know, what little prayer you're praying that you think is nothing. Or you might just think, this is just little old me, when in fact, it's really Allah depositing something inside of you. And I've always been, you all know about my journey of just kind of spiritually evolving and accepting gifts about myself and allowing those gifts to grow. This historical preservation process has been a magnification of those gifts as well. So much so to the point where there's conversations I've had with Allah where I say, Allah, I didn't want to see this clearly. I didn't want to see all of this. I don't want to see all this stuff, but it is what it is. So anyway, let's get into historical preservation. All right. And I got some notes here I'm going to be referencing so that you can get a real gist of this industry. All right. Historical preservation is the effort to safeguard and protect buildings, objects, landscapes, and other artifacts of historical significance. Okay. This is oftentimes an untouched and untapped field for us, because these types of objects, landscapes, artifacts that are historically significant to our underserved community are oftentimes destroyed. So you hear me talk a lot about gentrification potentially destroying our modern history, because after slavery, after Jim Crow, or during Jim Crow, we migrated to northern cities and we were redlined and forced to live in certain areas. Many of those areas were very near industrial areas, very near downtown areas. And so we lived there, but then later we were displaced. We were starting to be moved out into the outskirts of the city, They'd give us these vouchers. They tell us to move or move us into the housing projects. But then that real estate that was around that industry, around downtown, was either destroyed or regentrified. And so a lot of the great things that we did in those homes when we migrated north, where we literally, during that migration and that body of people, we literally created modern culture, oftentimes it's destroyed and stolen from us. So it involves identifying, evaluating, and preserving these resources to ensure they are available for future generations. This can include celebrating events. So you see a lot of Juneteenth events going on now. People, places, and ideas, as well as recognizing moments in history that may be painful or uncomfortable to remember. All right. So it's not just things that you're celebrating. Now, let's talk about the key aspects of historical preservation, which include, and I broke this down, but I want to go a little deeper. Identifying and documenting. Locating and documenting historic resources, including buildings, sites, and districts to determine their significance and eligibility for protection, right? So a big part of historical preservation. So when you see this big, beautiful house at 4847 South Woodlawn Avenue, the preservation aspect of it, the physical construction aspect of it is a component, but identifying and documenting not only historical events, historic architects or artifacts, historic architecture, all of that documentation is also a big part of the process. Okay. And we're going to be publishing some things very soon that you'll see and you'll learn some of what we've documented. If you've been on any of the tours, you've heard me talk about some of that research. Then there's protecting and preserving, which you all have heard me talk a lot about on the show. Implementing measures to safeguard historic resources from damage, destruction, or inappropriate alteration. The inappropriate alteration is very, very critical, especially when you're dealing with these turn of the century homes. Why? Because a lot of people don't realize this. It's so much easier to build a building from the ground up. Someone asked me this weekend, they said, what was easier to build, the hospital, the clinics, the spas, or restoring this? And I said, that other stuff is far more easier because you're starting with a blank slate. And once you decide on paper that gets interpreted architecturally in your building and process plan, how you're going to do it, what materials you're going to use, what regulatory requirements there are. Once you decide that, and that's all documented, you give those documents to a contractor, and it's a matter of just monitoring whether or not the contractor is following those documents. Now, in the case of something that's highly regulated like a hospital, there's a lot that goes into those documents. But once you get that part done, then the rest is easier. In the case of these turn of the century homes, it's not like that. So you may put together a general plan, but as you're going each step of the way, there's a problem that you have to solve. So these homes make you utilize your skills as a God, right? Because a God sees a problem, sees an issue, figures out a solution that's going to benefit all the stakeholders involved and implements it and makes a change. Well, in this particular case, they said here, inappropriate alterations, if you're trying to, like we did, to preserve as much of the building and the material of the building as possible, you have several alternatives. Let's say if you're doing walls, and we had walls and ceilings that had water damage and mold. And so you may want to say, okay, how do I get rid of this water damage and the mold? How do I preserve it without tearing as much of it down as possible? And then how do I make it look and make it functional? So there's little problems along the way, whether it's floors, whether it's your HVAC, and how you're going to snake it through the home, how you're going to do your duct work, how you're going to restore bricks. Because believe it or not, it's very difficult to find bricks from turn of the century projects that have the same color, that have the same finish. You have to test the mortar. You have to test the bricks. And so it's a very, very detailed process, even down to what you put on the ground, the type of concrete, the color, whether it's pavers, the types of windows. In our case, we had some windows that we reconstructed, and then we had some windows we saved. And so you'll see our Windows to the World project a little later on this year, but it's an involved process. Okay. So that's the protecting and preserving aspect. And there's a whole slew of industry experts within that segment. The other one is restoring and rehabilitating. Restoring and rehabilitating. Carefully restoring or rehabilitating historic properties to retain their original character and integrity while making them functional for future use. That's what I was just explaining previously. So you're preserving, but then you're creating or enhancing functionality. And so each step of the way, like I said, is so much easier. If you go in there and it's already gutted and ain't nothing there, that's easy. That's just like boom, 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 bring your trades in, knock it out. But when you are really, truly historically preserving something, and you want to preserve the integrity of the property, and you also want to make it functional for future use, you have to be a problem solver and a critical thinker. It's not just wham, bam, thank you, ma'am. It ain't just let me just slap something up against the wall. It is a really involved process that involves a significant amount of intelligence and spirituality. Okay. All right. Next, we're going to talk about interpreting and educating. So sharing the stories and significance of historic resources with the public through education, interpretation, and outreach. What does that mean? And how did we accomplish that? Or how are we working on that? We're working on a series called The Messenger's Residence. We've been we've interviewed a lot of people talking about their stories, and we still haven't even touched the surface of everything and everyone that has happened in that home. But it's a process, right? And so even listening to people who talk about, I used to walk past there, and understanding what they saw, what they felt, talking to people who lived there, talking to people who worked there, talking to people who came there, people who lived behind it or next door. And so this is where historic preservation comes full circle, because it allows you to put together the different pieces of the puzzle, because people only see from where they are, right? And so when you get an opportunity to just say, hey, what did you see when you lived in the back of the house? Or what did you see when you lived next door? Or what did you see when you walked past here every day going to school? That kind of thing. Or what stories, what happened here? And in the case of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, with Elijah Muhammad House, hundreds of people came there to meet with him. Iconic people, famous people, some you know and some you don't know. People who were instrumental in building and developing the Nation of Islam. People who were instrumental in in politics, in civil rights, in human rights. So there's a lot of studying to be done. There's a whole world, because in that house was the hospital, the bank, the court, the business development, the living, the residential, the diet, the how to eat to live, the dinners. I mean, it was incredible, an incredible treasure. Now, connecting with the past. Historic preservation helps us understand and connect with our history, providing a link to the past and shaping our understanding of the present. This is so critical. You heard the minister narrating in the video that I played at the beginning of the show, where helping us to understand and shape where we are right now in the present is critical as a guide to where we're going. Because a lot of us are absent of history. We're operating in vacuums. So we don't know. We don't know what happened before us. We don't know, especially those of us that are walking through the volume of the book, what is the prophetic thing that happened? I've had the blessed benefit of talking to so many people that were here and in the home during the time that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad was physically present. And then during the time of his departure. And I've even asked people questions related to emotional intelligence and what did they see? I remember asking a sister, I won't say her name. I said, what was it like before the departure of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad? And she said, I got 2 words for you. She said, Twilight Zone. And I was like, whoa. And so we spent some time. And I started doing this with a lot of the interviews, talking about what did you see? What did you feel? How were people acting? How were people treating one another? How were you treated? What types of things do you see happening today that was happening then? And this information is just invaluable. Like I said yesterday, I was talking about the Great Migration. To have a document or have a conversation that says, if I could talk to my grandmother and say, what were you thinking when you got on the train? Where'd you get the money? How long did you save up for that fee? I've looked it up, different places. Some people say it was $27 to come from Louisiana up north on the train. I haven't, it varies, right? Depending on how you rode. That's a lot of money. What were you thinking while you were on the train? Were you afraid? Were you nervous? Were you excited? When you got off the train, when the train stopped, and did your anxiety build as you got closer and closer? Did you even really know where you were going? Because, think about it. They a lot of times they'd never been to these places. I don't think she'd ever visited Nebraska prior to going there. I don't think many of our people had ever even been to what we now call Bronzeville prior to getting on the plane and coming up here. Some people had a cousin or a relative. I was watching the Mahalia Jackson story, and she had an aunt who was up here, who kind of helped guide her, who was in the church and things like that. But what about the sisters who got here and had to live in suffrage houses, who lived in like Phyllis Wheatley house because they didn't necessarily have any place to go, or wherever they thought they were going to go didn't turn out to be a place where they could go? What was happening in their mind? Having that documentation would be critical, very critical to us understanding how they moved the way they did, why they did what they did, how the enemy was able to plan and construct a process to keep us in a certain condition? Why is it that some that navigated during the first wave of the Great Migration came up north and started businesses and did very, very well for themselves? And then there was that second wave where people began to live in crowded slums, and then they built housing projects, and then we know how that turned out. Understanding that process, what happened in a societal way between that first wave and that second wave? When did real estate redlining start, and how did they implement it? And so there's all these industries that were created out of that wave. But I'm saying all that to say, connecting with the past, which helps you deconstruct the present, and then it helps you to strategize and plan moving forward. History is the greatest teacher. All right, preserving cultural heritage. It safeguards the cultural heritage of communities and nations, ensuring that important stories and traditions are passed on to future generations. So if you could keep those homes, if you don't have to sell grandma's home, don't sell it. If you could keep it, I know Sister Monica and I have talked a lot about preserving real estate that was in the family, in the home, if in the culture. If you can do that, do it. Who lived there? How do you preserve it? How do you preserve that person's legacy? And you don't have to be a family member of someone in order to preserve history and legacy. I'm a believer that I honor anybody from my culture, any historical information that I can find, whether it's a relative or not. The goal is to honor them. You know, I'm going to interject this and say that I was doing some studying about family, and a lot of people say, okay, Lyndon B. Johnson in the 50s in creating the whole welfare system and forcing the removal of the man from the home impacted our family structure. And I would agree. This is something that happened to these migrants. So we're talking about the Great Migration, and people came north and they got here, and then so many Black men were killed. A friend of mine, I remember his grandmother telling me that she lost her husband and her son when she migrated north from Mississippi. Her husband was tied to railroad tracks right over here outside of Maywood, Illinois, and killed. And then her son went out riding on his bike and mysteriously disappeared. She slept with a shotgun over her bed until her dying day, because in the area that she moved into over in Maywood, Illinois, people would come in and they would rape women, and they were trying to chase them out of the neighborhood. But she had something for them. She had this big old shotgun she had up above her headboard. Probably so if she heard them coming in the house, she got up, she had that shotgun. And she told me, she said, I caught me a couple with it. When I think about that, living like that, because anything was better than living under Jim Crow and sharecropping in the South. And so going back to family, that first phase of removing the man from the home and this whole psychological psych op that had been happening on us as women really since slavery. It didn't just start with L.B. Johnson with removing the men from the home, but something else began to happen slowly but surely, is as they started to pull us into good jobs and the whole corporate thing. I've also been studying how the Industrial Revolution impacted us as Black people, because as you all know, I do a lot of training of entrepreneurs. And as I'm deconstructing money psychology and business psychology, understanding where you grew up and how the Industrial Revolution impacted you also helps with getting you to faster absorb the science of business. And moving us past just owning a job and building a business. That's a whole nother thing. We may do a series of shows. I actually been working on this, studying business and Black people in business since Reconstruction. I've got a whole series of notes on that, but taking us through Jim Crow, Industrial Revolution, the whole corporate thing. But once they started to pull us in to corporate America, and we got a chance to stunt, we got a new car, we got this, we got that, we became more individualized. This rugged individualism started, and our village was dissolved. That concept of what they call the nuclear family, that what came with that was this rugged individualism. And a lot of us still practice it today. We practice it in Islam. We practice it in Christianity. We're still that rugged individualism. This is my stuff, my family. And the whole concept of the village, it dissolved. And so what you see when you go back and you start doing historical preservation is the presence of the village. Because, you know, even though a lot of times your children are in the house with you, a lot of times they reach a certain age where they don't really listen to you anymore. Or maybe they was listening to you at 90%, they go down to 50%. And oftentimes we view our children through our hopes and dreams for them. But what they showed up on the planet to do is completely ignored, or that inner voice is squashed. Some of our children are highly intelligent and have to be groomed in a certain capacity, and a village would help see past those blind spots. Some of our children are a little slow and they're behind, and they need extra work and extra time to get them caught up. Some of us have gotten into certain religious and cultural practices, and we're pushing our children through that, and they may be ill prepared. So the village helps, but understanding history also helps with that. Not just one-sided history. This is the other piece that I want to say before I move on. One of the things that I've learned with historical preservation and documenting ancestry and things like that is that you have to be very careful not to be biased. Believe it or not, the only historical preservation that many of us have seen has been that of our colonizer, if you will, controlling our history and telling us what it is. And so a lot of us approach history from that same standpoint, instead of just looking at it for what it is. And so we go out and we cherry pick research that supports our theory. And then we create circumstances that validate the theory that we've come up with. Where do you think we got that from? Okay. Let me keep going. Promoting tourism and economic development. So history is not all about, it's just free, it's nonprofit. It is big tourism business. Historic sites and districts can attract tourists and contribute to local economies. There's big money in tourism and hospitality, major industries. And everybody doesn't see fun around drinking and eating. Some people go to exhibits. Some people like going to museums. Some people like going to historic sites. People travel from around the world to come to historic sites, and they pay for it. All right. Now, let's talk about how it enhances quality of life. Preserving historic resources can enhance the beauty and character of communities, creating a sense of place and pride. I want you to think about the city, the great city of Chicago. One of the things that Chicago is known for is its diverse architecture. So we got stuff dating as far back as the turn of the century or before, all the way down to modern, technologically enhanced buildings. Then you have some places where you got the shell that's still prior to turn of the century, or at turn of the century, or still historic, I should say. And then the inside, they've gutted it and made it all modern. There's a home in Hyde Park where there's a famous CEO who recently purchased the home, and he is keeping some historic artifacts. He's keeping the historical shell, but he's making the inside state of the art. And then instead of throwing away a lot of things, he's going to enhance it in the technology on the inside. So very, very interesting approach. But this can help with the diversity and development of the cities. Have you ever gone to some of these cities where all the houses look the same? All the buildings look the same. Everything's just same. It's just boring, right? That happens a lot in new cities. I worked with a couple of companies who build cities in sub-Saharan West Africa, and they have a tendency to make like these cookie cutter buildings, and they all look the same. That's what I love about Chicago, is that the architecture is so diverse. Here are the different types of organizations that are involved in historic preservation. And I want you guys to feel free. I see you in the chat, Brother Lamont. I see you, Mom. I see you, Sister Monica. I see you guys, some of the users, I don't know. Put your questions in here, questions or comments about historical preservation. There's a lot of different organizations. There's these historic organizations, and then there's people like myself who I was already a business consultant, but I've expanded my historical preservation consulting to include specialty in that area. Some of the things I cover, from just being an owner's rep and helping you navigate through that, making some of the decisions that you need to make, teaching you how to navigate from a real estate standpoint. And it's a business. How do you preserve and navigate the financial, and how do you put together a business model, which has become really important and popular now, because prior to this new presidential cycle, people pretty much were like, oh, it's a nonprofit game. And so they go out, they try to see if they can find free money, and they fund their museum or their historic site. But I'm so grateful for Almighty God, Allah, and the Honorable Elijah Muhammad for helping me to see that that's not the only approach to preservation. And the more we focus on independent preservation, the less dependent we are on people who don't necessarily want us to preserve certain aspects of history. So people may want you to preserve the music of a particular historical person, but they don't want you to preserve the struggle, because they probably already got the rights to the music or access to the rights to the music. But the struggle, the part that ties it in, the part that's going to encourage new musicians, new artists, new people, they don't want you tying that together, because they don't want little Tay-Tay down the street who's an aspiring rapper to hear the story of Buddy Guy or Muddy Waters or Hattie McDaniels. They don't want them to hear that struggle, because they're going to structure their deals differently. they're going to approach it differently. They don't want that, but they want the music and the art. So when you learn to pull all this stuff together and make it a holistic preservation process, it's way more powerful. All right. So why do I say that? Because you have to diversify your business model. And let me tell you something. One of the biggest impediments to us in business is we always think we know. We got huge egos. We always compete and we get triggered so easily. Once we get triggered, we start lying. We start making up stuff. We start showing out. We start feeling insecure. Look, at the end of the day, submit to the knowledge, submit to the wisdom. You may not be compatible with me, but find some place where you can actually learn, somebody who you trust. And I always tell people, stop hiring people that don't have receipts. And when people show you who they are, believe them. So business models. We should have a number of different revenue streams and manners in which we design ways to attract revenue to our historic sites. Okay. Some may be smaller, some may be larger. I was just talking to somebody the other day, and I said something as small as selling t-shirts that brings your historic site a couple $1,000s a month can pay some local operating costs. You can pay for some advertising, pay for some dollars. You never know when those pipelines that you create are going to expand and grow. And one of the things, if you work with me, I will show you how to build pipelines. See, because here's our problem. We want something that's big. We want to get in front of the crowd. We want somebody to give us an award. We want somebody to show us who we are. We want to make all this big money. We want to be transferring. We're using all this street vibration around it. That's so lame and so low tone and so low vibrational. Learn to build pipelines in every business and for yourself. You never know when that little small pipeline that you built could save your life. Again, that's another show. Anyway, here's some different organizations. All right. We talked about, you got the independent organizations that are showing you how to do this on a mass scale in a different way. Then you got the National Park Service, or NPS. The NPS is the primary federal agency responsible for historic preservation, administering the National Register of Historic Places, and providing grants and technical assistance. Okay. The Elijah Muhammad House is listed on the National Historic Registry through the NPS. So we have participated in that process. One of the things that's very different now with this new administration is that the NPS is not having as much money to go around. So again, diversifying your historic properties portfolio is critical. Learning how to build pipelines. Stop acting like you got it. Stop acting like you know. Some of us are so comfortable with begging and asking somebody to do for us what we can do for ourselves that we refuse to build pipelines. We just think, I'm just going to double down and ask even harder. Build pipelines. And I can show you how to build a pipeline. You should be building pipelines for yourself. All right. State Historic Preservation Offices, or SHPOs. Each state has a SHPO that works with local governments and the public to implement federal and state preservation programs. A lot of what you're going to see now happening, especially with the federal government tightening purse strings, people are going to be pushing more towards SHPOs. They're going to push more towards local foundations. And what I'm saying to us as Black people, I don't know how logical it is for us to expect someone to give us money to educate us when they, in fact, were the ones who liquidated or unpersoned our historical figures and properties in the first place. Okay, so relying totally on that, it just doesn't make sense. You got to build pipelines. If you relied on it in the past and you've done really well with it in the past, that's good. Okay, that's great. But now is the time. Diversify. Start talking to your local state representative and see what's available in your state, in your local municipality, in your local community, what funding is available, what professionals are around that you can sit down and talk to and say, hey, I want to preserve this. Let me tell you something. It was the independent business people and the so-called street people that built a lot of these preservation organizations in the 50s and 60s. You go back, and I was studying the Negro Opera House in Pittsburgh, and it was individuals, business people who financed that. See, they didn't have grants and they didn't have this free money to depend upon. They didn't have that. So they went to each other and said, how are we going to do that? When Poro College was built down in St. Louis, she did that through funding from people in the community. And people like her and other entrepreneurs went and they funded the NAACP until they started getting federal funding. So what happened is the government stepped in and started financing a lot of these organizations that we were independently paying for. Well, whoever controls the purse strings controls how you move. And you may be functioning at a level where you don't really see the difference, and I'm sorry for you. But if you're really trying to help, then find a way to build a pipeline so that you can independently function and invest in the future. So there's SHPOs, there's NPS, there's your local historic preservation commissions. Okay, these are commissions are responsible for identifying, evaluating, and protecting historic resources. We work with those too. So you're going to want to make sure you got relationships in that area as well. And then there's private organizations and individuals. And in many cultures, there are individuals from that culture who finance the preservation of that culture, oftentimes except in our community. You know how many people have called me stupid, dumb, crazy? I am from the culture that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad built. And so I am helping to preserve that culture and share that culture with the world. Each of us should be doing that with the different cultures that we're a part of. It's technically not anybody else's responsibility to preserve your and my culture, but us. But us. Now, if you can go out there and get you a grant and get you some free money, go get it. Go do it. But do not solely rely on that. You have to build pipelines. You got to diversify your portfolio. These things take money. They're very expensive. But a diverse portfolio is going to help you to pull in and to build. The reason why I call them pipelines is because you got to build them and you can develop them. We have a tendency to think, oh, I just come up with this idea and it makes money overnight. That rarely happens. Okay, rarely happens. All right, so with that, family, excuse me, Make sure you go out and visit us online, sajdahhouse.com. Excuse me. It's like the dust is all of a sudden getting to me, right? And I took an allergy pill before I got on here with y'all. Go visit us online. See the work that we're doing. I hope this helps you to understand it in a broader and deeper way and what all goes into it. The fact that we've made inroads into this industry and into this aspect of society is a big deal. It's a big deal. And it takes strategy. It takes a lot. Let's see who we got here in the chat. Sister Monica, Mom, Brother Lamont, Diane Thomas, good morning. Peace and blessings. Good morning. ASA sis, you inspire spirituality and cultural legacy as part of our historical foundation. When done, this is how we tell our own story. Peace. That was from CDM. Yeah, this is how we tell our own story. We have to start taking responsibility for our own story. It's not just about, I see so many of us preserving or attempting, and we're taking baby steps. We're attempting to preserve, but we're so superficial. We're on the surface. When our future is inspired by us going deeper. I talked about the Honorable Elijah Muhammad in 1952 purchasing that home, but from the departure of Master Fard Muhammad in 1933, 1934, until he purchased that home in 1952, he was on the run. He went to jail. There was a lot that he had to do in order to just get to the point where he could rebuild. See, there was a fall that time. And I'm not going to go deep into it, but he had to rebuild, redevelop. He was on the run. He got arrested. The mail was usurped. There was surveillance following him across the street, pulling him over, questioning him. There was a lot. There was the establishment of independent education where he and many of the early followers, including his wife, were jailed for allegedly contributing to the delinquency of minors just because they wanted to independently educate our children. He was arrested and jailed at 45 years old for sedition and draft dodging. Anybody knows that the draft wasn't for 45-year-olds? So there was a lot that was incurred and happened prior to the building of this $100 million empire, prior to changing the lives of these thousands of people, prior to moving into this beautiful and amazing home, prior to Muhammad Ali, prior to Malcolm X, prior to the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. Prior to that, there was a whole slew of activities that he and his family had to endure and navigate just to get to that point. So when you're thinking about what you go through, you might be less apt to give up if you saw the story of somebody else who got to that point after having gone through a whole lot. See, we give up because we're just looking at the end. We're just like, no, I want the $100 million. Well, what did he have to do to get there? Well, no, I just want to be a powerful minister. I want people to see me as the Messiah. Well, how did he have to do? What behaviors did he have to eradicate from himself? And what was his evolution to becoming a God? You see? I don't care what inventor or what great person you're looking at. There was a process to get there. What was that process? And see, oftentimes when you're dealing with these agencies, They want you to take that out. They want you to remove the religion. How often did he pray? What happened? We know that during the time of J. Edgar Hoover, the government was an enemy of the rise of everybody Black. That's in music, that's in politics, that's in healthcare. So how did they strategize against us in real estate? And are we seeing some of those signs today where we're only going to know if we study and we preserve the history? How do we navigate around that? How do we educate people on the other side to say, you know what, you just doing what your ancestors did, but let me show you how that's wrong. See, if we don't come to the table with the education of history, we can't properly negotiate. We can't properly be leaders. We can't properly rebuild these wasted cities because we don't even know how to combat the things that are coming against us. We don't even see how we're stuck in a pattern and how they're stuck in a pattern. We don't even see a way out of it. So we say, oh, I'm preserving. I have Malcolm X College there now, but you don't know nothing about Malcolm X. You know nothing about his struggle. You know nothing about what he had to overcome to get where he is. You just see the name and it's like an empty shell. You drive past and somebody says, oh, you know, so-and-so used to live there. It's like an empty shell. You don't know anything about the person. You can't emotionally attach to the person and utilize their sojourn as a way to inspire you because that's all being removed. They're just a picture. They're just a name. So this is about going deeper and creating inspiration, unaliving energy, activating tones and processes and activities and historical meetings and things like that that took place so that you can come and hook into it spiritually. And that energy can fuel you and future generations. All right, family. Thank you all. Thank you for joining this morning. I hope that this helped you to better understand what we're doing, the depth of which what we're doing and why it's so important. This ain't about being seen. This ain't about being superficial. This ain't about being cute. This is about legacy and true spiritual preservation. All right. Okay, family. So go to the website, join, go to sajdahhouse.com. If you want to be a sponsor of any of our events or anything in the house, send an email to sajdahhouse@gmail.com. Put sponsor in the subject line and then explain to me what you were thinking in terms of sponsorship, because we're very careful about curating the right sponsorship for you. And some people have sponsored events. And so we're grateful for that. And we got some events we're working on now, just working through some details on that. I'm going to get that out to you all so you all can attend. And if you're an artist and you're interested in our Windows to the World project, you can email me at that same email address. But just go to the website. There'll be information there. You can stay up. Make a donation today. Go to Cash App, Sajdah Enterprises. You can Zelle us at wendy100m@gmail.com. You can hit that super chat button. But let's let the world know that God is alive and well, and he cares about what we are doing. We can't demonstrate to the world that God cares about what we're doing until we care about it ourselves. All right, family, I'm going to leave out and we're going to show that history video again, just so that you close out understanding how important historical preservation is, even in your individual lives. Document your journey. Document your journey. Save your yearbooks. Save things that are important to milestones so that your family later can understand. But even deeper than that, We now have a way where we can create videos, we can write, help people understand the mindset. That's important. Okay, family, I'm out of here. I'll see you all later. Assalamu alaikum.
The Honorable Elijah Muhammad, who in my judgment is the master historian, taught us that of all our studies, history is the most attractive, and it is best qualified to reward the researcher. History is most attractive. Why should history be most attractive? Because history is the recorded time of the human family in its struggle to overcome obstacles. There is no life that is without struggle. The Holy Quran teaches us that man, meaning man and woman, is made to face difficulties. And after difficulty comes ease. But it is history that guides us through difficulty. For if you know how people who had difficulty yesterday got through, and if your difficulty is somewhat similar, then today we also can get through if we follow the guidance of history. This is why Carter G. Woodson and many of our black giants fought for black people to know our history. Because in not knowing our history, we don't have a guide. And without a guide, we are lost. No wonder the Bible